I need the police to answer immediately. My wife and child are shot badly.
They did check him?
Yes, sir.
It's official that they're dead?
Is that the last time you talked to him?
Yes.
You know, I tried to turn him over, and I don't know, I figured it out.
There was blood, there was brain, skull, hair, and there's nothing on him.
You've got enough evidence to convict Alex Murdaugh. Where is it?
My son was in a boat wreck a few months back.
Who was the last person you saw driving?
I'm pretty sure it's Paul.
He's not broke by anybody's standards.
It's a guinea.
This is a chicken.
And I lied about being down there.
I wouldn't have defended Alex if I believed for 1 minute he killed Paul. I can tell you that much.
You take this gun or any gun like it and blow your son's brains out.
No, I did not. I'm innocent. I would never hurt my wife, Maggie, and I would never hurt my son, Paul.
When the life of Alex Murdaugh began to unravel, it brought down a South Carolina legal dynasty of power and influence going back decades. After years of drug use and stealing millions from friends and clients, Murdaugh would find himself accused of the unthinkable, the murders of his wife Maggie and youngest son Paul. This is Victim to Verdict. 70 miles west of Charleston is South Carolina's Low Country, a mix of small towns and open space. It includes a 1,700-acre property at 4147 Moselle Road, owned in June of 2021 by the Murdaugh family, Alec and Maggie and their sons, Buster and Paul.
Moselle was their most recent property, and it was kind of a hunting plantation type place. Great setup for hunting everything, and not Maggie's favorite place to be, but the boys loved it.
The Murdaughs owned several properties, but Moselle was a favorite, especially for Alec and Paul.
I think the plan was for Paul to take over Moselle one day.
He loved outdoors, hunting, fishing, hanging around. Really enjoyed the farm out there at Moselle.
They like to hunt and fish together. I mean, they drink beer together.
That's Paul's laugh just before 8 o'clock Monday evening, June 7th, 2021, recording his father, Alec.
What you see me doing is fooling with a fruit tree that I'd been tending to, and it was falling over, and Papa was laughing at me, trying to get it back upright.
Just over an hour later, Paul and his mother, Maggie, were dead.
Hampton County 911, where's your emergency?
This is Alex Murdaugh at 4147 Moselle Road. I need the police to answer immediately. My wife and child are shot badly.
There was a caller who stated he had found his wife and son shot.
Sergeant Daniel Green, with his body camera rolling, was one of the first on scene.
I could see Mr. Murdaugh down at the end of the driveway. As I approached toward him, I could see the male victim laying on the ground to my left, as well as the female victim on the ground to my right.
The scene is secure. Got a Whiskey Fox, Whiskey Mike. Turn around for me.
I don't have any.
Okay, yes sir, I see that. Okay.
After telling Sergeant Green about a shotgun he grabbed for protection,
that is loaded.
Okay.
You might want to unload it.
Alec shared with the sergeant who he thought killed his wife and son.
His immediate reaction was to start telling me about an incident that had happened with his son with a boating accident.
From inside the house?
Sir, yes, sir. I went and got. This is a long story. My son was in a boat wreck a few months back. He's been getting threats. Most of it's been benign stuff we didn't take serious.
Okay.
You know, he's been getting like punched. I know that's somebody. I know that's what it is.
Alec had also mentioned that boat crash to the 911 operator.
He's been being threatened by, my son had a boat wreck. He's been being threatened for months and months and months.
There was something else Sergeant Green said he noticed about Alec.
He did not appear to be crying. He was upset, but I did not see any visible tears.
Captain Jason Chapman and Detective Laura Rutland arrive on scene a short time later.
The first thing that stood out to me was his clothes. He was so clean because it was a very graphic scene. It was a mess around Paul. It was soaking wet. There was blood. There was brain, skull, hair. And he had said that he tried to turn him over and he checked him. And there's nothing on him.
We see shell casings scattered around the ground that are obviously rifle casings. There's some evidence to support that at least one or more shots into Paul were from a shotgun. That means 2 weapons. So were there 2 people? Are there other people that may be injured? We could see that Maggie, there was nothing laying beside her. We looked closely. Again, we didn't move her. So we went over to Paul, and I had a couple of the deputies there and a detective lift the sheet. That was simply because we're trying to determine, do we have somebody in the woods? Where are the weapons? Was it a murder-suicide? Was it just a straight murder?
Somebody going to check them?
Yes, sir. They've already checked them.
They did check them?
Yes, sir.
It's official that they're dead?
Yes, sir. That's what it looks like.
Both Maggie and Paul had been shot in the head, Paul with a shotgun, Maggie with a blackout rifle. Maggie Murdaugh was 52. Paul was 22.
She loved her family. She loved her boys. Buster and Paul were her world. Paul was a sweet, sweet boy.
There were so many different scenarios it could have been that night. So in my view, everybody was a suspect.
Investigators recorded an initial interview with Alec, and for the 3rd time, he brought up the boat accident.
What comes to my mind is my son Paul was in a boat wreck a couple years ago, and there's been he was charged with being arrested for being the driver. There's been a lot of negative publicity about that.
While investigators may have been zeroing in on Alex Murdaugh, his family and friends, including his brothers and son Buster, were immediately by his side.
Yeah, his demeanor was, he was destroyed. He was heartbroken. I walked in the door and saw him and gave him a hug and just broken down.
I jumped out and ran to him.
And what was his condition, Alex?
Oh, he was just broken. Distraught. Everybody was. There were a few other people there, but he just, all we did is hugged and cried.
For those that knew the Murdaugh family and really knew Alec, there was just no way he could kill Maggie and Paul.
They loved each other. I've never seen that man even raise his voice at his wife or kids.
From your observation, how would you describe Alec's relationship with Maggie?
It was good. It wasn't perfect, but Maggie was happy.
And how would you describe Alec's relationship with Paul?
They had a very good relationship. They were kind of best friends in a way.
It would take a lot more to convince the family that he did it. They knew how he cared and loved for Maggie and Paul and Buster, and then they were his life. His head was blown off. No father could do that to the son, and I can assure you no Murdaugh could do it to a Murdaugh.
Coming up, the boat accident.
Who was the last person you saw driving?
I'm pretty sure it's Paul.
And Alex Murdaugh's secret life exposed.
He told me that he had been addicted to opioids. He had been stealing money from his clients in the firm.
Plus, the timeline and the video that would change everything.
Hey, Bubba.
We explored all various possibilities, but the roads all came back to Alec.
When's the last time you talked to Maggie? Hour and a half ago, probably 2 hours ago. Okay, you said about 2 hours ago you talked to them? Approximately, yes ma'am, approximately.
Alex Murdaugh claimed he had an alibi the night his wife and son were shot to death. In 3 interviews with South Carolina law enforcement, Murdaugh said after having dinner with Maggie and Paul, they went down to the kennels and he stayed behind, taking a nap in the house before leaving to visit his mother, who has Alzheimer's.
I stayed in the house.
Okay.
And I was watching TV, looking at my phone, and I actually fell asleep on the couch.
Okay.
I knew she'd gone to the kennel. I was at the house. I left the house and went to my mom's.
When the dispatcher asked you when was the last time you saw Maggie or talked to Maggie, you said an hour and a half, 2 hours ago.
I think that's probably about right.
Every time he gave a time reference, he was off, but he always said, my phone, you can get it from my phone.
When y'all get my phone, you know, I think one of the first things I did when I got up was call Maggie because I was going to my mom's.
Investigators relied less on Alec and more on hard evidence, which included the Murdaugh family phones and the movements from his Chevy Suburban.
The cell phone and GPS records in this case were so important, especially when you compare it to Alex Murdaugh's version of events. Sometimes it helped him out, it matched up with his story, but other times it didn't.
According to cell phone records, Alec arrived at the Moselle property at 6:42 p.m. This as Maggie was making her way to Moselle from the family beach house in Edisto. Paul, meanwhile, arrives a little after 7 p.m.
We rode around the duck pond. I mean, we just, you know, we rode the property.
Yes, sir.
You know, we rode the property.
At 7:39, Paul records Alec working with a tree on the property.
Better than it was, ain't it?
Paul sends that video on Snapchat about 15 minutes later at 7:56, showing Alec wearing a blue button-up shirt and khaki pants, a completely different outfit from the shorts and t-shirt he was wearing when police arrived on scene.
Paul's Snapchat video is crucial to the case, not only for the timeline of events on the day of the murders, but also for what Alex Murdaugh is wearing in that video.
At what point in the evening did you change clothes?
I'm not sure. What time of day was that? I would have thought I'd already changed.
Maggie arrives at Moselle at 8:17. Alec claims the family had dinner together in the house, and then Maggie and Paul went to the kennels.
You know, we hung around the house for a little while. I know that Maggie went to the kennels. I don't know exactly where Paul went, but he left the house too. I stayed in the house.
Okay.
And I was watching TV, looking at my phone, and I actually fell asleep on the couch.
Okay.
Alec's cell phone records him taking 283 steps just before getting into his Chevy Suburban at 9:07 p.m. He would arrive at his parents' home in Alameda at 9:22.
Checked on my mom, talked with Shelly for a few minutes. You know,
Shelly is
the caregiver.
Okay.
Inside the home at Alameda, along with his mother, was Shelly Smith, a caretaker who had been working with Alec's ailing parents for years. She told investigators that Alex was there and stayed for about 20 minutes.
How long would you say you were at your mom's that night?
45 minutes, an hour.
Alec leaves Alameda at 9:43 and makes it back to Moselle at 10 p.m., reaching a max speed of 80 miles per hour. 5 minutes later, Alec drives to the kennels and calls 911 within 20 seconds of pulling up.
This is Alex Murdaugh at 4147 Moselle Road. I need the police and the ambulance immediately. My wife and child just shot badly.
We know Alec called 911 within 20 seconds of pulling up to the kennels, but he told the 911 dispatcher that he had already checked the bodies of Maggie and Paul.
I'd already touched them trying to get to see if they were breathing.
Alec's phone, for the most part, matches his story, but his son Paul's phone would destroy it, and Alex's claim that he was never at the dog kennels the night of the murders.
Hey, he's got a bird in his mouth!
At 8:44, Paul Murdaugh records this video at the dog kennels, and anyone who was familiar with the Murdaughs could identify 3 voices: Paul, Maggie, and Alec.
Hey, Bubba. That's a guinea.
This is a chicken. Come here, Cash. Come here, Baba. Cash.
It's hard to get around, being at the murder scene with the victims just moments before they died and then lying about it. What innocent person does that? And of course, we explored all various possibilities, but the roads all came back to Alec.
The kennel video, in and of itself, is favorable evidence for Alec. It just depicts a family down at the kennels. There's no tension, there's no fight, there's no anger, there's no threats, there's no nothing. Under the state's theory, within minutes of that, Alec guns his wife and son down. For what reason? Still no one can give it a reason.
You think I killed Paul? I have to go where the evidence and the facts take me, and I don't have anything that points to anybody else at this time.
So does that mean that I am a suspect?
You were still in this.
Alec Murdaugh being the husband and the first person to call, naturally you have to ask those questions. And they worked hard to get him out of the circle. And as he continues to talk, his stories just don't make sense.
Coming up, Alec Murdaugh's life begins to unravel.
I was already struggling with bills, and I knew I couldn't do it.
Hampton County 911 was your emergency.
I got a flat tire, and I stopped, and somebody stopped to help me, and when I turned my back, they tried to shoot me.
This is Alec Murdaugh after calling 911 3 months after the murders of his wife Maggie and son Paul. Murdaugh claims he's been shot in the head along the side of a road a few miles from his home.
You need EMS? Yes, I can't drive. Okay, and I'm bleeding a lot.
At first, it might seem that the person responsible for the murder of Alec's wife and son were now after him. But that would not be the case.
There is a man on the side of the road with blood all over him and he's waving his hands. He looks fine, but it kind of looks like a setup, so we didn't stop.
Months after the murder of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh, Alec's life began to spiral out of control. Murdaugh was forced to resign from his family law firm for stealing client funds. Then, on September 6, 2021, Alec announced he was admitting himself into a rehab facility to treat decades of drug abuse. Murdaugh would then admit that he asked this man, Curtis Eddie Smith, to shoot him on the side of the road so that his surviving son Buster could collect a $10 million life insurance policy. Shortly after, Alec Murdaugh would be arrested for fraud.
Your Honor, he has had a tremendous opioid addiction. The death of his wife and son have put him over the edge in terms of that addiction, and that is why one of the major reasons he was considering having himself killed.
The arrest would set off a chain of events leading to several more charges of financial crimes. Then, on July 14, 2021, over a year and a half after the murder of his wife and son, Alec was charged for fatally shooting Maggie with a rifle and Paul with a shotgun.
Mr. Murdaugh, did you kill your wife and son?
If you didn't do it, who did?
In July of 2022, Alec Murdaugh, accused of murdering his wife Maggie and son Paul, appeared before Judge Clifton Newman for an arraignment.
What say you, Richard Alec Murdaugh? Are you guilty or not guilty?
The sight of a Murdaugh in handcuffs was for many hard to believe.
How shall you be tried?
By God and my country.
The Murdaugh name for decades has been synonymous with wealth, power, and the law. Dating back 86 years, a Murdaugh has been the top prosecutor for the 14th District of South Carolina, all the way up until Alex's father, Randolph III, retired in 2006. There were even Murdaugh portraits hanging in the courtroom, which Judge Newman had to remove.
Mr. Murdaugh's grandfather's portrait hangs in the courtroom. It should be removed.
Alec Murdaugh attended the University of South Carolina. It's where he met his wife, Maggie. The two were married in 1993, the year Alec graduated from law school. In 1996, their first son, Buster, was born, and 3 years later, their son, Paul. While Alec was never solicitor, he did prosecute a few cases with his father and had a prosecutor's badge that he carried with him.
And who gave you that badge?
My father. I've found that law enforcement oftentimes is friendlier when you're in law enforcement. I wanted to be a solicitor for a long time, but at the time when my dad retired, I was already struggling with pills, and I knew I couldn't do it.
Besides the drugs and the financial crimes, there was also the boat crash.
What bridge is Paul, what bridge is this? Paul, what bridge?
911, where's your emergency? Hello? Police, fire, EMS. Hello?
February 24th, 2019, at 2:30 in the morning, Paul Murdaugh and 5 of his friends in a boat owned by the Murdaughs crashed into a bridge.
We're in a boat crash on Archer Street.
Whereabouts on Archer Street?
In Archer Street, the only bridge on Archer Street.
What's going on?
We're in a boat crash. Female Mallory Beach is missing.
19-year-old Mallory Beach was thrown from the boat and died. Her body wasn't recovered until a week after the accident. Paul Murdaugh would face criminal charges, and the family of Mallory Beach was coming after the Murdaughs.
The Beaches wanted accountability from Alec, and they weren't going to stop with anything less.
On the day of the boat crash, there's surveillance video that captures Paul at a convenience store, and he uses his brother Buster's ID to purchase alcohol. And on his way out, he raises his arms and seems to be celebrating.
According to friends, after a night of drinking at a house party, the group was back on the boat. Surveillance video shows the group making a stop in downtown Beaufort, South Carolina. According to Miley Altman, who was on the boat, that stop was Paul's idea to get more alcohol.
Like at first, we didn't want to go, but Paul was like, you could kind of tell he was a little drunk and he wanted to go. And Morgan, that's his girlfriend, Morgan, they kind of got into it, fighting about it, and he was like, he just was very persistent about going up to Luther's and getting shot.
As the rest of the group waited outside, Paul Murdaugh and Connor Cook went into a bar and consumed shots of alcohol. Paul, at this point, according to his friends, was extremely intoxicated.
He gets drunk a lot, and it's just kind of like he just is a whole other person when he's drunk. And he does this thing with his hands where he spreads them apart and he can't keep them together.
That's Mallory Beach with her boyfriend, Anthony Cook, walking back to the boat.
In the video, there's this moment where Mallory Beach is with her boyfriend, Anthony Cook. They're having a good time. They're on their way back to the boat, and it's just heartbreaking to watch because we know that's the last hour of her life.
Once on board, friends say Paul began fighting over who should be driving.
No, he was yelling at Paul, and Paul was just like I said earlier, when he's drunk, he's determined to do something. He wouldn't let anybody else drive, and then Mallory wanted Anthony to drive. And
who wanted Anthony?
Mallory.
Okay.
The one who was sitting next to him. He was like, I want Anthony to drive, and Anthony was like, let me drive. And Paul was like, no, I'm not gonna let you drive because this is my boat.
Y'all know Alex Murdaugh?
Oh yeah, I know that name.
That's his son.
That's so driving.
Good luck.
After the crash, Alex Murdaugh and his father, Randolph Murdaugh, showed up at the hospital. Alec had his solicitor badge out for everybody to see as he went room to room.
That night of the boat wreck, you say you don't remember putting your badge out, correct?
I don't even remember having my badge, and I specifically know that I didn't use the badge. Did I mean to do this? I'm not saying that I didn't.
Do you remember going around talking to the kids? The other kids that were on the boat?
Yeah. I talked to some of them.
According to statements from hospital staff, Paul was, quote, loud and rude and was cursing at ER staff. And Alec was, quote, walking throughout the ER trying to talk to all patients involved, introducing himself to ER staff. And told one of the kids, quote, we will figure this out. It will all be okay.
At this point, prosecutors believe that Alec was there for a couple of reasons. First, to defuse the situation, but also making the rounds, trying to establish that his son Paul was not the driver of that boat when it crashed.
On April 18, 2019, on what would have been Mallory Beach's 20th birthday, Paul Murdaugh was charged with 3 felonies in connection with the boat case. He pled not guilty and was released on bond.
You know, amongst the family, none of us thought that he was driving the boat.
Coming up, the world watches as Alex Murdaugh goes on trial.
Everybody knows the Murdaughs. You know, it's a household name that's been here forever.
A year and a half after Maggie and Paul were killed, Alex Murdaugh was brought to the Colleton County, South Carolina courthouse to stand trial for the murders of his wife and son.
I'm a native South Carolinian, so I've been following the case. I know the Low Country well, and we're retired, so we had time to come down and just kind of participate, I guess.
I've just really gotten so obsessed with this. It's my first retirement adventure, and so I want to see the completion.
He walked in the room and my heart just like sank. It was so crazy. That was very cool, but kind of eerie at the same time.
The trial began with opening statements, each side telling a very different story about Alex Murdaugh.
The evidence is going to be such that you're going to reach the inescapable conclusion that Alec murdered Maggie and Paul, that he was the storm, that the storm was coming for them. They died as a result.
This is Alex Murdaugh. And Alec was the loving father of Paul and the loving husband of Maggie. They decided that night he did it.
Men kill spouses too frequently. Men don't kill their adult sons very frequently unless it's like some argument. And there was no argument here. There's no fight here. And it's just, you know, it's mind-boggling how people think that Alec, who loved his family and that was his life, would have executed his son. And then for what reason?
Something else that didn't make sense, Paul was murdered with a shotgun, Maggie with a blackout rifle. Why would Alec or anyone else use 2 guns?
Big question. 1 shooter or 2? 2 guns, shotgun and an AR. Was there enough time to kill Paul and then find the AR and then ambush Maggie? Much more likely there were 2 people.
During the trial, both sides brought in experts to reconstruct the crime scene, offering different opinions on everything from where the shooter or shooters were standing to how tall they were.
One explanation would be 2 shooters. I'm sorry? Yes? I wasn't there. No. But it is a reasonable explanation, just like 1 shooter running up that way, correct?
This thing with the shooters being 5'2" or 5'4", you can't determine that from what our expert had said, and for somebody to try to determine the height seemed to just go a little too far.
Is it your expert opinion that a 6'4" shooter cannot be excluded from the murder of Maggie and Paul?
I see nothing that could exclude a 6'4" shooter.
Can you exclude 2 shooters?
I cannot include or exclude 2 shooters.
Can the defense include, to the exclusion of all other possibilities, 2 shooters?
Absolutely not.
Mr. Palmbach, do you have an opinion based upon more probably than not whether there was 1 or 2 shooters who murdered Maggie and Paul on the night of June 7th?
My opinion is the totality of the evidence is more suggestive of a 2-shooter scenario.
Well, I wouldn't have defended Alex if I believed for 1 minute he killed Paul. I can tell you that much. I would not have done that. And so that's what I believed then, that's what I believe now.
Prosecutors argued that Murdaugh's life was unraveling. He was a drug addict who'd been stealing money from clients and his law partners for years. And Paul's boating accident, they argued, might have been the final straw.
Did he confess to you the truth of his life, that those of whom were close to him, no one knew?
He confessed to me things about him that I didn't know.
And you had no idea about any of that?
No, sir.
And he said it had been going on for years, the reality of his life?
He
told me that he had been addicted to opioids, and I think he said either 420 or over 20 years.
I think he did love Maggie. I think he did love Paul. But to sustain his lifestyle, his way of living, the person he really cared about the most was Alex.
This case was unlike a normal murder case. You know, if Alec wasn't the killer, he would be our first witness, the grieving father who uncovered this scene. The murder case and the white-collar cases really started to converge and come to a peak.
After the boat case, did you notice any changes in Alec's behavior or his demeanor around the office?
That's when he started making some disbursements that he was stealing from that started getting sloppy.
You may call your next witness.
Then, Alex Murdaugh decided to take the stand.
When a defendant takes the stand to testify, it changes everything. And that was certainly the case in this trial.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Murdaugh, did you take this gun or any gun like it and blow your son's brains out on June 7th or any day or any time?
No, I did not.
Did you shoot a .300 blackout into her head, causing her death?
Mr. Griffin, I didn't shoot my wife or my son anytime. Ever.
And you would agree with me that for years you were stealing money from clients?
I admit candidly in all of these cases, Mr. Waters, that I took money that was not mine and I shouldn't have done it. I hate the fact that I did it.
Judge Newman's decision to allow in all of the financial crimes of Alex Murdaugh was huge. This allowed prosecutors to show to the jury that Alex Murdaugh was a habitual liar and had been so for years.
I know you want to get through it quicker, but we're not. So answer the question, please.
What I admit is that I misled them.
In 2019 alone, you stole about $3.7 million?
No, I think that's correct. You have charged me with murdering my wife and my son, and I have sat here for all these weeks listening to all this financial stuff that I did wrong, that I'm embarrassed by. But what I can tell you is that in all these financial situations, I stole money that was not my money. I misled people that I shouldn't have misled, and I did wrong.
Murdaugh admitted to years of lying and stealing, but maintained he would never murder his wife and son. But what about that kennel video?
Hey, he's got a bird in his mouth!
Were you in fact at the kennels at 8:44 p.m. on the night Maggie and Paul were murdered?
I was.
Did you lie to Sled Agent Owen and Deputy Laura Rutland on the night of June 7th and told them that you stayed at the house after dinner?
I did lie to them.
Alec gets on the witness stand and he admits that he's lied. He's lied about the financial schemes. He lied about being at the kennels. That is him in the kennel video. But then he wants the jury to believe him in that moment, believe him when he says he didn't murder his wife and his son.
Alec, why did you lie?
As my addiction evolved over time, I would get in these situations or circumstances where I would get paranoid thinking. That night, June 7th, after finding Mags and Paul, I'm sitting in a police car with David Owen asking me about my relationship with my wife and my son. And all those things coupled together after finding them, coupled with my distrust for Sled, caused me to have paranoid thoughts.
He has a long history of deception, and it goes to show just how much was on the line and what kind of stresses were on Mr. Murdaugh on June 7th.
Then it was time for closing arguments.
He's lied to everyone close to him, and he's good at it. He's fooled them all. And he fooled Maggie and Paul too. And they paid for it with their lives.
And you've heard weeks testimony about Alec's financial crimes, drug addiction, and lies. But after all that, the state has failed to provide a satisfactory answer to this question. Why? The state cannot provide an answer to this question because the answer is he would not, under any circumstances, murder those that meant the most to him. On behalf of Alex, on behalf of Buster, on behalf of Maggie, and on behalf of my friend Paul, I respectfully request that you do not compound a family tragedy with another. Thank you.
Coming up, the verdict.
I understand that there is a verdict. You may bring the jury.
And the Honorable Judge Clifton Newman.
And I know you have to see Paul and Maggie during the night times when you're attempting to go to sleep.
Less than 3 hours after getting the case, the jury, deciding the fate of Alex Murdaugh, announced that they had reached a verdict.
Less than 3 hours, we had a verdict. Everyone outside the courthouse was a little surprised. The media rushed inside to grab a seat in the courtroom, but a lot of the members of the public who'd been there day in and day out filling the gallery had gone home for the evening, didn't realize that it would take such a short amount of time for this jury to reach a verdict, including some of the members of the Murdaugh family. They weren't able to make it back in time to actually watch the verdict unfold.
Be seated.
I understand that there is a verdict. You may bring the jury.
Inside the courtroom, as we all waited for this momentous verdict, you could hear a pin drop. The bailiff had warned the gallery, no audible reaction once the verdict was read.
I'm a realist, and I thought, well, this is really bad. But then I'm thinking, you know, I've had juries come back in shorter time with a defense verdict, and maybe this is one of those cases. And so I did have hope.
The defendant will rise. Madam Clerk, you may publish the verdict.
The State versus Richard Alexander Murdaugh, defendant. Indictment for murder, SC Code 16-3-0010, CDR Code 0116. Verdict, guilty.
There was no emotion from Alex Murdaugh during the reading of the verdict. A defendant who at times seemed to really sob during the testimony of the trial, stoic as his fate was read in front of everyone.
When Ms. Becky read that verdict, I think that the thing that instantly came into my mind was, I'm so glad I didn't put this whole team through all of this work and then we not get the result that we thought was appropriate. And I think you saw me go down the line and hug everybody on the team, and you saw some tears come out, and that was that sense from all of us.
One of the most memorable moments of the Alex Murdaugh verdict was when the judge remanded him into the custody of the sheriff's department. He turns and he looks into the gallery. He makes eye contact with his son Buster. He mouths, "I love you." And then he's handcuffed. We can all hear the handcuffs clicking. And then he turns to walk out in front of the jury that just convicted him of double murder.
You know, I'm confident that the jury didn't believe Alex's explanation for lying about being down there, because they had been hearing 2.5 weeks of testimony about how he lied to his clients to steal money, how he lied to his partners to their face, and how he is a accomplished liar. And when it comes time for him to tell why he lied, I mean, he's not believable. He was disappointed, but he wasn't totally surprised. I mean, going into it, he questioned whether he could get a fair trial in this climate.
Today's verdict proves that no one, no matter who you are in society, is above the law. And our criminal justice system worked tonight. It gave a voice to Maggie and Paul Murdaugh, who were brutally mowed down and murdered on the night of June 7th, 2021 by someone that they loved and someone that they trusted.
If we put up 1,000 pieces of evidence before a jury and they want to pick on 1 or 2 or 3 pieces of evidence, that means there's 997 pieces of evidence that they got right. and that the jury relied on to convict Alec Murdaugh.
We got justice, which I think is what was entitled. It's sad because there's lost, poor Buster's out there has lost a family, and we all feel that.
The next day, Alex Murdaugh was back in the courtroom, standing in his jail clothing and sticking to his story.
Alec, how does Buster feel about your guilty? How does Buster feel about you being found guilty?
Alex Murdaugh, now a convicted double murderer, walks into the courtroom for sentencing day wearing jailhouse garb, his demeanor much more deflated. You could tell that he was a little bit more defeated as he walked in, that he stood to listen to the judge and to hear what his fate would be.
Good morning, Your Honor. I'm innocent. I would never hurt my wife, Maggie, and I would never hurt my son, Paw.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Then it was time for Judge Clifton Newman to impose the sentence.
Mr. Murdaugh, if you'll come to the court for sentencing. This has been perhaps one of the most troubling cases, not just for me as a judge, but for all of the citizens in this community, all the citizens in this state, and as we've seen based on the media coverage there throughout the nation, and it was especially heartbreaking for me to see you go in the media from being a grieving father who lost a wife and a son to being the person indicted and convicted of killing them. And I know you have to see Paul and Maggie during the night times when you're attempting to go to sleep. I'm sure they come and visit you.
All day and every night.
Yeah, I'm sure. And they will continue to do so.
Judge Newman directly speaks to Alex Murdaugh before formally sentencing him, almost as if he wants to engage in a conversation about what happened to Maggie and Paul, but Alex Murdaugh's not buying it. He remains defiant. All he will really say is that he is innocent and he did not kill his wife and son.
I respect this court, but I'm innocent. I would never, under any circumstances, hurt my wife, Maggie, and I would never, under any circumstances, hurt my son, Paw.
Well, and it might not have been you. It might have been the monster you become. Mr. Murdaugh, I sentence you to the State Department of Corrections on each of the murder indictments in the murder of your wife, Maggie Murdaugh. I sentence you for the term of the rest of your natural life. For the murder of Paul Murdaugh, whom you probably loved so much, I sentence you to prison for murdering him for the rest of your natural life. Carry forth on the imposition.
You know, we're just moving forward. That was one step of the process. We'd hoped that would be the end of the process on the murder charges, but it wasn't. So right now we are preparing for an appeal. That's where we are.
People can speculate, you know, and they have tried to speculate about, you know, Mexican cartels and all this other stuff. There was absolutely no evidence of any of that. The perfect storm that arrived was Alec.
It will be an uphill battle on a retrial, and that Alec's best chance of being ultimately acquitted of these murders is finding out who actually did it.